I got an idea. Let's take the loudest person on stage and cram a bunch of microphones all around him. Today I'm going to show you how to mic drums so that you get the best drum sounds of your life. Now it all starts at the source, so be sure to check out this other video on how to tune the drums. But after they're tuned, mic placement and mic choice are your best bet for getting great tone out of your drums. I mean, I love EQ, but I'd rather fix it at the source. Hey, if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. You'll be glad you did. So let's jump into miking the kick drum. Now for any other drum, you can use just about any instrument mic you want. But for the kick drum, you have to make sure that it's got extended low frequency response. Now I've had a lot of success with the Audix D6 and the AKG D112, but other ones work too, like the ones from Shure, Audio-Technica, Sennheiser, Electro Voice. There's a whole bunch out there. Each mic has its own flavor, but it's got to fit your drummer, the drum, and the sound that you're going for. With the kick drum, we're trying to balance snap, punch, and sustain. There's basically two methods you can use. You can go inside the kick drum or outside the kick drum on the front head. Inside the kick drum, you're going to get more beater sound and more snap, while outside the kick drum, you're going to get more punch and sustain. Now, I tend to use EQ to compensate for whichever one I'm using, but in live sound, there's a special consideration. Because we've got giant subs not too far from the drum kit, there can be feedback coming in through the kick drum microphone if you've got it cranked way up. If this is the case, I'll put the kick drum mic inside the drum and crank up the bottom end on the board. This is just a safety issue because I don't want to have to deal with feedback. Now, the thing we're trying to avoid with the kick drum is a cardboard sound, unless you're mixing jazz, but if you're mixing jazz at church, maybe I should come to your church. You'll get the most cardboard sound right in the center of the drum head, so I try to avoid that spot. Now, even on the inside of the kick drum, you can still have some tone control by moving the mic closer to the beater head or further away to get either more or less snap. One more thing to look out for on the kick drum is to make sure that nothing's touching the resonant head. Anything touching the sound hole can make it tear, and that'll destroy your sound faster than Michael Vick leaves a Peter rally. Now, one other thing that's a little less conventional is to use a PZM or a pressure zone microphone on the inside of the kick drum with a regular large diaphragm microphone on the outside. This gets you the punch and snap on the inside while getting the sustain and the beef on the inside. Shure and Crown make mics that are designed specifically for this, and I found this PV1 lying around in the shop and gave it a try, so give it a listen. Stick it in there on some of the dampening, and we'll make sure that this cable is up and out of the way. I'm going to put my kick out mic over here. I'm going to leave a few inches so that I've got some room in between there. I never want to touch the drum head. I'm going to put the cable over this on the mic stand for that so that it's not touching the head. You can see there, it's not touching. Now, when a snare drum is mic'd just right, it gives me chills. Now, snare drum has a few different parts to it, and the more you mix it, the more you'll be able to dissect the different areas. So when miking the snare drum, you got a couple different variables. You've got the angle, you've got the distance from the drum, and you've got the position over the rim. Now, directional microphones are brighter when they're on axis. So the more you point the mic right where the stick hits, you're going to get that initial transient. The more you shoot it across the drum, you're going to get more of the top end from the resonance as well. And again, this is kind of like splitting hairs, but after you do it for a long time, you'll really get to dial it in. Now, when you point the microphone down at the drum at a steeper angle, it seems a little bouncier, and I don't really like the sound of that. I'm wondering if it's because of the diaphragm and the drum head resonating with each other, but either way, I don't love it. All right, so here we got 3 snare drum microphones. They're at different angles. You can see they're all about the same distance from the head, or from the rim, but the different angle makes a difference in the drum tone. Now, when it comes to height, I like to set my microphone capsule about 2 fingers above the drum head. You can use 1 finger or you can use something else to measure, but this is built in on me and it's on me all the time. Unless I borrowed money from the Irish mob and got some fingers cut off. When it comes to mic height, the closer you are to the drum, the more you're going to get some proximity effect. Higher up off the drum is going to be a little bit thinner. Closer down is going to be a little bit thicker. Now the position over the rim and the drum head makes a difference too. I forgot to record this when I shot this with Travis, but basically the further in you go into the middle of the drum, you're going to get a different tone rather than when you're by the rim. I like it right over the rim and it just works. Now the other thing you have to think about is rejecting the hi-hat, because the drummer's probably bashing on it right there and it's right next to the mic. Now if you have a cardioid microphone, you'll want to point the back of the microphone as much out to the hi-hat as possible. This is going to give you the most rejection. Other microphones are super or hypercardioid, and so they'll have off-axis rejection to the sides a little bit more. It can be a little bit tighter pattern and get you a little bit more rejection. Here, let's listen to the SM57 and the Beta 57A and hear the difference between the two. Now, in the name of science, let's swap the positions on those so you can see if there's a difference there too. Now for the snare drum, you could use an Audix i5 and that wouldn't make me mad at all. But if you can't get a snare drum to sound right with 57, it's not the 57's fault, it's your fault. Now if you're feeling funky and you've got the mics, you can try an Electro Voice RE20 or a Sennheiser 441. The 441 gives you a lot of focus and the RE20 gives you punch for days. It's awesome. You should give it a try. Now the snare bottom is not a completely necessary mic. There's usually enough of the snare sound coming into the top mic. But if you want it, here's what you can do. I tend to place my bottom mic at about the same position as the top mic, but at a 90-degree angle. So if my top mic's coming in like this, I'm gonna set my bottom mic like this, and I'm gonna try to get the capsules to be about the same distance from the drum heads. Now remember, you've gotta flip the polarity on the snare bottom mic, or else you're gonna lose all your bottom end, and no amount of EQ is gonna bring it back. A 57 works great on the snare bottom, but if you're wanting something a little bit brighter, you can try a small diaphragm condenser. But be careful, if you compress this too much, you can get noise from the kick drum, and that can get a little annoying. Now, one other thing that can take it up a notch is to line up the snares with the drum mic. This can make it a little awkward for your drummer to hit the snares on and off, but hey, it sounds better and you get a little bit more of that pop out of it. Now on toms, the same principles apply. The steeper you have the mic pointed at the drum head, the more attack you're going to get. But if you have it pointed more across the drum, you're going to get more resonance and sustain. Now, the Audix D2 and D4 are fantastic tom mics, but there's one thing that I don't love about them, and it bugs me just a little bit. The mount makes it so that the capsule wants to be further in on the drum head than I want it to be. I want it to be right over the rim, just like I have it with the snare drum. So to do that, you've got to kind of bend it in a weird position and crane it back, and it probably bends back while the drummer's hitting it anyway. Now, because we've got rack and floor toms are much bigger. And in general, a bigger drum, you want to come a little bit further off the drum. Again, you can use your fingers as a guide to select the distance that you are above the drum. Now again, this is a compromise because we're not just trying to pick up drums, we're trying to not pick up cymbals. Now I see some guys point the mic right down at the drum head, right beside the rim. And some guys over at a church in Northern California that's quite popular right now like to do it that way, but it doesn't get me the greatest results. The attack doesn't feel natural and it kind of feels choked off. So if you run into that, try pointing the mic more toward the middle of the drum. Now, it does get you better signal to noise ratio, so sometimes you just have to compromise. Now, you could gate the toms to get the cymbals out of them, but that never really works well for me. Either it doesn't open up in time, or I'm chasing it around trying to get the threshold set just right. And then in the middle of a set, I want to be mixing musically, not technically chasing around tom gates. Now, the real solution for this is actually to move the cymbals higher, but you got to convince your drummer to do that. Now with the overheads, you can mic just the cymbals or you can get an overall kit sound. If I can, I really like to get the whole kit sound from my overheads. That way I have a whole lot more texture options and that's really exciting. Even if I don't quite get the kit just how I want it, I can always just roll up the high pass filter and just use the overhead mics as cymbal mics. With stereo overheads, you generally want to use a spaced pair in live sound. Because of the noise on stage or the reflections from the drum booth, I don't usually use X, Y, or a near coincident pair for miking overheads. The spaced pair gets me the best signal to noise ratio and the driest, cleanest cymbals. In a minute, we'll head over to the nerd zone so you can learn how your ears hear things in stereo, and you can learn how not to set up your overhead mics. In today's Nerd Zone, I'm going to teach you how to not be ridiculous with your overhead mics and get a super wide stereo image. Let's dive in. There are 3 things that your brain uses to tell which direction something is coming from: timing, intensity, and frequency balance. Your brain is a timing supercomputer, so it can hear the difference between the sound arriving at one ear versus the other. Since sound travels at 1130 feet per second, when your ear hears sound coming from one side before it hears at the other side, it thinks, hey, it's coming from that direction. If a sound is louder in one ear than the other, that's another way that we can tell what direction it's coming from. This is why your pan knob works. Lower frequencies can bend around your head and reach both ears, but higher frequencies can't. So when we have a higher proportion of high frequencies coming from one side rather than the other, that tells our brain, hey, it's coming from this direction. So here's why using a spaced pair and pointing them toward the center of the drum kit is wrong. When the drummer hits the crash cymbal on the right side of the drum kit, the sound travels from that cymbal and arrives at the right microphone first. The sound does arrive at this left microphone later. However, it's not any darker than it is at the close microphone because this cymbal is on axis to this microphone. However, when we point our overhead microphone straight down or even away from the center of the kit, we're utilizing Mike's polar pattern to reject more of the higher frequencies coming from the other side of the drum kit. So we're still getting the timing difference, but we're also getting a tone difference. And that is why you shouldn't point your overhead microphones toward the center of the kit. That's it for Nerd Zone. Now back to safe for everyone nerd levels. So if you space out the overhead so that they look great from the front, you're not going to have the kick and the snare in the center of your stereo image. And yes, the beater sound of the kick drum does come through the overhead mics. So to fix this, I like to orient the center axis of the overhead mics along the kick and the snare. It might look a little funny, but it gets you a great stereo image. I tend to measure from the center of the snare drum to get this to happen. This way, the snare drum is arriving at both of them at the same time. Having the snare drum arrive at both mics at the same time makes sure that it's in the center of the stereo image, and it makes sure that they're at the same phase. Now, when you have more than one when you have more than one microphone on a sound source, you have to worry about phase. When you have one microphone close and one microphone further away, there's going to be a timing difference between when those microphones pick up the sound source. This timing difference can turn into a phase cancellation. So when you're setting the height on the overhead mics, listen to it with the snare drum mic so that you can make sure that the phase isn't canceling out. Sometimes you can flip the polarity to fix that, and sometimes you have to actually just move the mics. Now, if you're wanting to just mic the cymbals, just mic the cymbals. Try to get the mics about the same distance from each of the cymbals so that they sound balanced. The Jesus Culture method to do this is to measure with a drumstick from the cymbal to the overhead mic. Some people will try to mic from underneath the cymbals. While that might look great, I've never really gotten it to sound great for me. Your mileage may vary. Now, I love stereo overheads, but sometimes you just have mono and you gotta roll with it. In this case, you just have to put the mic in the place that picks up all the different cymbals about the same. Then there are other situations when the overhead mics are just there for show because so much of it's coming through the singer mics anyway. Even in those situations, still put up the mic anyway. You never know when a drummer's gonna come out with a shaker. All right, so let's hear all the results. I'm gonna have Travis play a groove, and I'll isolate each mic and let you hear them all in context. But before we do, if you want help getting your sound team set up for success, download my free guide, How to Lead Your Church Sound Team. The link's down in the description below. Hit it, Travis. And hey, if you've got more drum miking tips, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Be sure to hit thumbs up if you like this video, hit thumbs down if you hated it, share with a friend, hit subscribe and ding the little bell, and we'll see you back here next time.